imagine if you could set up a 5-light LED studio lighting kit on a budget of about 125 to 200 pounds, or roughly equivalent US dollars, using just ceiling lights and ceiling panels. In this video I will show you how to do that. I'm actually using that lighting setup right now. So before you even watch the video, you can see the results I'm getting. So let's have a look at the lights themselves that we're going to use to build our studio lighting kit. So here are the 40-watt surface mount LED panels. They're 600 by 600 millimeters. If you want something a bit brighter, you can get 48 watts. What's important with this setup is we've got 6500K. So we're going to use quite a blue cold light for this lighting. And because of that, we might get an ever so slight blue or purple tint to our video production, but we can easily color correct that when it comes to editing the video in post-production. Now if you want more lights, you can get 600 by 1200. So what's important to notice here is we've bought the LED panels with the frames. Now you could buy them without the frames and get them for about 22 pounds and then figure out a different mounting system than I'm going to use, but I've bought the frames because they're going to be integral to how I mount these lights in my studio. Now when it comes to mounting these and creating the U bracket, I've made them out of metal and I've not really costed that in, and the reason I've not done that is because you can make the same frame out of wood, which is really going to reduce your cost. Now if you've got access to some scrap metal, then you can create a much more polished professional look, but if all you've got access is to some wood, you can make exactly the same system, and you're just going to change the U bracket, and that's going to make a little bit more sense as we go through the build. Now these are the ceiling strip lights I've used. They're 36 watt. I'm using these to light my backdrop, and there's a rim light behind me, and as you can see they're under 20 pounds each, so 3 of these is going to set you back about 60 pounds. So if you don't need to buy any materials, you're at 125 pounds just for the light. If you've got some cable in and some plugs and a few bits and bobs and maybe something to make the frame, then you really can make a 5-light LED lighting kit for a really low cost. So when I've said 125 to 200, I've allowed 70 pounds in there. Maybe if you need materials, some cabling, all these other bits and bobs we're going to be using when we create the lighting setup. Now there will be many different ways to mount these. I'm just going to give you some ideas that I've come up with. You might find some that reduce the costs even more, and if you do, don't forget to share that with me. I'd love to see your ideas and your solutions in creating one of these lighting kits. Now these kits are not the tube variety, these are just a strip. It's all in one, it's contained in one, and all you have to do is wire in at the end. So I've bought these just because it's much easier to use these to create lighting setups. Now if you wanted to create brighter, you could double up. You can get 6-foot versions of this, which are going to put out a bit more light, but for lighting a backdrop in a small studio and providing rim light, this is absolutely fine. And here is the same lighting setup. I just wanted to show you what it looked like on a black backdrop, and in this I'm just using my main light and my fill light and a rim at the back. Let me just switch the rim off so you can see how that looks. So that's without the rim and that's with the rim. Now another little tip for you is this 5-light infrared remote control for plug sockets. Now you get a little plug adapter, you plug it into your socket, and then you can just switch this on and off, and you can find these on eBay and Amazon. Really useful for when you're setting up lights like this where their mains supplied, and you can just switch them on and off. So I can literally, if I want to, just switch one of these lights off now. So very easy to control. So let's go and have a look at how I've built this lighting kit and give you some tips and tricks that you can use and change and improve on maybe when you create your own LED lighting studio using these ceiling panels and strip lights. So here's everything we're going to need for the panel, to make the panel, and the frame to mount the panel, and also to wire this into the mains. Now obviously I'm in the UK, so I'm going to be using UK components in terms of measurements and in terms of fuses and plugs. So obviously we've got the panel itself, which is here. So as you can see, it's quite a large panel. It's 600 millimeters by 600 millimeters. Now the power supply adapter comes with the lights. Then we've got some connectors here when we join up the wire. We've got some lighting wiring here. We're only going to use the live and the neutral. The earth, we don't need it here. We're going to crop that off. Obviously, I'm going to wire this myself, but I would not recommend you do the same. I recommend you get a qualified electrician either to do the wiring or to test the wiring before you go live. I've got an old plug, so whenever I get an appliance that packs up, always keep the plug. So I've got a plug already. I've got some fuses here. I'm going to use the 5 amp fuses because that is usually what the lamps are going to run off. And with this setup, we can literally wire this straight into the mains because these lights are designed to run off the lighting in the house, which is a main supply. Then we've got the components for the frame, a couple of L brackets, a couple of pieces of bar, and this bar is 15mm by 15mm. Now you don't have to use bar. You could use wood and bring the cost of this down really low, but I wanted this to be quite sturdy. So what we've got here is a Bullhead Adapter as well. So we're going to be using this to mount the frame onto my boom arm, which you'll see later. This is optional. You don't necessarily need to use this type of setup, so you could save some money here if you're just mounting it straight on a lighting stand and you're mounting it upright, which you'll understand a little bit more about later. Then we've got some bolts. Just need a couple of bolts, don't need all these, we just need a couple of bolts to go through the sides to mount our frame onto. We're going to need some bolts with some locking nuts for our angle bracket and our bar to join them together. So that's pretty much it. So what we're going to do is we're going to cut this down to size. So let's go and cut those. So what we're going to do now is we're going to make the mounting frame. So we're going to take this angle bracket and we're going to drill 2 holes here and here, 2 holes here and here, and we're going to bolt those, and we're going to pop a locking nut on the end and make that nice and secure. And obviously we're making a U-frame, so we'll do that on both sides. So here's a little tip for you to help you get the bars nice and straight and the L bracket so that your U-frame is nice and even all the way around. You just clamp your bracket on to the bar and then drill them while it's clamped using G-clamps like this, and that way you'll know you're perfectly straight and the U-frame will come out nice and neat. Obviously another top tip is when you're drilling holes in metal, step up at least 3 or 4 drill bits in size. Start with a small one and end with your big one, the size you want. It needs to be big enough for the bolt going through the bracket and the tube. So we want to come down about maybe 32 centimeters, and that's going to put us just about the center. We have to allow enough at the top here to make sure we've got a gap so that the bolts don't touch when this pivots. So with that in mind, I'm probably just gonna, I'll probably come to 33 on this as I come down. Yours will differ because of your brackets. Just another little note, I ran out of my other bolts, so I just used some hex bolts and standard nuts here, and they're probably enough. You probably don't need locking nuts, to be honest. So I'm just going to line this up, and then I've got a mark here where my hole is, and I'm just going to make a mark in the middle. I'm going to lay that flat, add this one in, and I'm just going to match it on the other side. So when it comes to drilling these extrusions, I don't want to damage these. I don't want to have to repaint these. I do have some white paint, but I want to make sure that when I put them in the clamp that we can drill them without damaging them. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to wrap some cardboard over, clamp it, and then I'll drill my hole. You don't want to drill this part. If you've got the same kit as this, you want to drill this part because this is going to be load bearing side and it's much stronger. So what we need to do now is flip the frame over, so these are showing on the back, and we're going to slide our panel in. And then we're going to put our last extrusion in on the bottom. So now we've got a panel, but we've got a slight problem because in this kit the panel is held by gravity. So if we turn this up and it's this sort of way, this panel is going to flap between here and here. There's nothing to retain it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a couple of blocks of wood, cut them, and just pop them in here to create some tension there and screw them through the top. So we're putting our blocks in place and then we're going to screw them in. So that's nice and snug without being overly tight. So we've got our two frames, we've hung them up on the washing line, Don't Tell Philomena, and we're going to spray them now. We're going to give them a coat of primer and we're going to then give them a coat of black paint. So I've took some zip strips, attached them to the washing line, and then I had an old handle on a paint tin. I've just chopped that up into small hooks so that we can spray the item and we can get all around the hooks and the holes and they're not going to touch the framework. So this is a great way just to hang something if you're going to do some painting like this. Okay, so I've got the top of my frame, I've got this bolt connected. Now if you're in the UK, be aware that all these fittings are going to be in Imperial. So I had a little bit of trouble finding an Imperial bolt, but I found one. And I've just taken one of these. I had a little spacer and other little bits as well. And I've just made up this quick mount head, which we're just going to attach. Now we need to attach the frame to the bracket. I've got a couple of old bolts, I've used as spacers. It just helps me adjust how wide I want this actually to be. I've just got a bolt straight through. I'm just going to put a bolt on this side, tighten them up to get the friction I want on the panel to hold it in place but still allow manoeuvrability, and I'm pretty much good to go. So these are some LED strip lights. We're just going to use these to light a green screen backdrop. I'm going to put these on a stick in a can, but before we do that we're just going to wire them. Really simple to wire in, 2-core cable, and you just match the colours. So blue this side, brown this side. Again, I've popped a 5-amp fuse in the plug, so we're pretty much good to go. To mount the strip light for the green screen backdrop, I've used 2 stick in a cans, which is a stick in a can with cement. And if you look carefully, you put the sticks at the back of the can, fill it with cement, and then we have the strip light attached to the stick in a can. Now you'll notice that I've got 2 stick in a cans back to back. I've screwed them together, and that gives me the stand, a space-saving stand to use in my studio. And this is a known photographer's trick. Sticking a cans in a studio where you're restricted on space means you don't have tripod legs and stand legs kicking out all over the place. So there you go, there's the LED panel and mounted and hung on my boom arm. I use boom arms, that means I can move the panels around really easily. So that's a simple setup there. That's all the elements attached so you can see them in use. And here is one of the side lights I'm using to light my backdrop. I've mounted that strip light on a backdrop stand in my studio, and I've also added 2 brackets on there to adjust it backwards and forwards, and that just allows me to tilt the light up at the ceiling if I want it to be dimmer, or tilt it towards the subject, behind the subject. This is for rim lighting, if I want that to be a little bit brighter. So it just gives me a little bit more control, but it's not necessarily. You could literally just put this strip light straight on the ceiling and it'd be a great rim light to mount. Really easy to set up, really practical, great, and you can put these anywhere you want really. And here is the last of my panels. So that's 2 panels, 3 strip lights, 5 light studio setup. So here you can see the frame mounted on a boom arm, which gives me a lot of flexibility. Now, as I said earlier, if you wanted to create this and turn it upside down, so it's just mounted on a stand by itself, which would bring the cost down, then it really is just a case of figuring out how you're going to attach whichever stand you've got to that single hole on the frame. Also, just wanted to show you the back of the device. So to mount the LED driver, as you can see, the power adapter, I've just stuck some sticky Velcro on the back of the panel, some sticky Velcro on the actual power adapter itself, and now we've attached that adapter and we can move it around if we need to. You'll also notice my wiring here where I just connected the two cables. I just doubled them over and then put plenty of electrical tape and insulation around them. Remember, always get your work checked by an electrician if you're going to do it yourself. And that is the lighting panel mounted. So hopefully that gives you a good idea of what this looks like when it's mounted in the studio on a boom arm with this particular setup. And remember, if you've got a low budget, you don't have to go to all this trouble. There's lots of ways you can do this much cheaper than what I've done here, as we didn't count all of this into that build cost. But if you've already got a couple of studio stands and you want to make the frame out of wood like we mentioned earlier, then you really can keep the cost down and produce a 5-light studio lighting kit on a really, really low budget. It's when you begin to compare the LED lights to this type of lighting which I've replaced that you begin to see its real benefits. Now, these fluorescent lighting kits, you can see here there's £150 for a set of 3, which isn't a bad price for continuous lighting, but there's some problems with these types of light. Number one, they use a lot of power because you're using 5 bulbs in each. My main and my fill, my two main lights before I replaced them, actually had 7 bulbs in each, and they averaged probably about 60-65 watts per bulb. I've now replaced those with 2 panels that are 40 watt each, so huge savings. And then on the side lighting my backdrop, I had 4 bulbs on each side, so that's another 8, and then 3 at the back just to provide the rim I needed. And the 5-light setup I've used is actually giving me more light, marginally more, not huge amounts more, but it's giving me more light than they were. I've actually had to turn my exposure on my camera down to cope with these lights. And the other thing with these lights is they're very bulky, the bulbs shatter, and I'm not sure sometimes that the material in these bulbs is that safe for use in a studio. And I did used to get a funny smell when they've been burning for a long time, and I wasn't happy with the smell because that just made me think there was some sort of gas burn off going on, which I was never quite happy about. And I would often come out of the studio with a very sore throat. Now that just might be me just imagining things, but I wasn't happy with them. And they did chuck out some heat. And these LED panels can be on all day, and you'll touch them and they'll be slightly warm at the end of the day. So very safe. And the other things, these are quite bulky. You don't realize until you're in a small studio. These soft boxes get quite bulky. They take up a lot of space. They're hard to fit in. These LED lights, the panels, the way I've got them mounted, I can fold them back against the wall. The strip lights take up no space whatsoever. Really, really space efficient. So they're a huge step up in terms of cost saving, quality, space saving than these fluorescent lighting kits, which you're going to get for about the same sort of budget because you do get the stands and everything in these kits. To be honest, the stands you get in these kits usually ain't that great. They're very lightweight and very easy to topple over unless you put some ankle weights on them, some sandbag ankle weights to hold them down. So in my opinion, these LED lights are much, much superior to the fluorescent kits. Now, I could have added a dimmer to these kits, but I didn't, and there's a reason why. LED lights are actually not continuous. They actually flicker, and they flicker at a certain rate. And if I used a dimmer, I will get a variation on the amount of power going through the LEDs, and then a variation in the flicker. So if you're in the UK, it's going to be 50 Hertz. In the US, it's probably going to be 60 Hertz. And if you're getting video flicker from the lights, what you have to do is you have to match your shutter speed on your camera to that frequency. So for instance, I'm in the UK, 50 Hertz. So I'm going to actually set my shutter speed at a multiple of 50, so 25, 50, 100, 150 FPS, and that'll overcome any flickering. And obviously in the US it might be 60 Hertz and you need to do 30 frames a second with your video, 60 frames a second, 120 frames a second, and the same for photography. You might have a shutter speed of 30, 60, 120, 240, 180. one of those shutter speeds that's consistent with the hertz that your electricity supply is outputting and causing the LEDs to pulse. So really, all you have to do is you're getting pulsing, try 50. If that doesn't work, try 60. I'm getting no problems whatsoever with these lights. But if I added a dimmer, like I said, if I turn it up and down, I'm going to be changing the variation of the hertz with some of these kits, and the lights are not going to perform well, because then I've got to try and find the shutter speed for that. Now there are LED lights that are dimmable and they tend to cost a bit more, so if you do really want that, make sure you buy an LED panel or a strip light that says it's dimmable and then apply your dimmer switch. So I hope you found that useful. If you're interested in guerrilla video production, low-cost video production, or if you're interested in photography, creative photography, online marketing, or building your own business online that generates residual income, then please do take the time to subscribe to this channel, and I look forward to catching up with you in another video.